Welcome to Behind the Big Read, where we dig a little deeper into some of the weekly features found at sportsnet.ca. I'm Danielle Michaud, and this week's feature is diversity in Major League Baseball at the front office level, or lack thereof. We're joined by this week's author, David Singh. David, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So this topic and title has now gone to I Can Find You Brilliance. Can you give me like the bite-sized version of your big read?
Sure. So there are plenty of people of color on Major League Baseball diamonds. It's 41% to be exact. But what about behind the scenes? When you peel back the curtain and you look at who's making the decisions on these 30 clubs, you find out that it's predominantly white males. Now, Major League Baseball knows this is a problem in today's society. You need front offices that reflect the general population and that reflect the population on the field. That's the job of Renee Tirado. She's MLB's Chief of Diversity and Inclusion, and it's really her job to address this issue within baseball. So what I did with the feature is to look at her life and look at the job she's doing and the challenge that's in front of her.
Now, this topic isn't a secret to anyone. I think anyone would know that this is a problem within Major League Baseball, but why did you feel compelled to get into this story in the first place?
Yeah, I actually spoke to Renee late last year for a story I was doing on Farhan Zaidi, who, as you know, is the San Francisco Giants president, the first South Asian to assume a presidential role within baseball. And for the story, I spoke to Renee and I found her very fascinating. All the things she was talking about, her diversity initiatives, what she had to say about herself, what she had to say about Farhan. And I just found it so intriguing, and it kind of set me on this rabbit hole to try and get her for a story. She actually came to this very studio a couple months ago, and we sat down for about 3 hours. Great interview, and beyond that, I just went into speaking to people in and around her orbit to find out who she is as a person and what drives her, and then find out also how she's doing in this major role.
And reading the piece, I felt Renee seems like she has to be a certain kind of person to take on a job or a role that feels this overwhelming. How did you feel Renee's personality was when you met her?
I found her very professional and passionate. Those are the two words I would use to describe her. People I spoke to for the story said Renee is very serious and you wouldn't want to mess with her. And I think that's a fair thing to say, because when you're talking about the topic of diversity and when you're trying to address diversity, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You have to have a certain level of sternness to you. But there is passion within her, and I spoke to professors in universities in the States, and Renee will go around to college campuses to essentially recruit students. And what I found from the professors who observed her in action is that the students gravitate towards her because of A, her attentiveness, and B, her passion. He would tell me stories about how Renee would sit down with them all day long from 9 to 5 and just talk about opportunities in baseball. And so I think the passion really shines through that, and people are attracted to her because of that.
She's only been in the role since the late 2016, so it's still fairly new, but she's seen quite a bit of success with some of the initiatives she's already brought in, and there's one particular example that you have.
Yeah, so her approach is very program-based initiatives, and her number one program is arguably the Diversity Fellowship Program. And what that does is it seeks to give people of color and women who are college graduates entry-level jobs within baseball front offices and also the commissioner's office. In the first year, which was last year, the inaugural class, by all accounts, it seemed to do very well, according to Renee and according to Major League Baseball. And I spoke for the story to Christian Perez, who was seen as the shining star of that class. He told me that the class provided him basically a master's of baseball because it exposed him to all the different angles of working in a front office. And lo and behold, he actually got a job with the Cincinnati Reds, an on-field job with them, based off his experience in the fellowship program. So he's someone that is what the fellowship program aspires to create.
So you see a team like the Reds then open to these types of opportunities, but would you say you found a lack of, maybe not interest, but reception to the programs that Renee is trying to initiate?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. So only 18 of 30 Major League Baseball clubs chose to take a fellow from this program. And that's 60%, and there's still 40% left.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. But Renee said that she was comfortable having students go to teams that want them, teams that are open for this kind of atmosphere. And if they're not ready, they're not ready. So Renee seems hopeful that in the future, they'll be able to get more teams on board, especially now that they see the success of Christian Perez.
So looking at baseball then as a whole, how is baseball managing to diversify themselves in comparison to some of the other major sports?
Yeah, so I don't think you can say baseball is a leader. The TIDES study that comes out every year, TIDES is an institute that looks at racial and gender hiring practices within sports. Major League Baseball ranks below the NFL, below the NBA in terms of percentage of women in the central office. That's not great. In terms of gender hiring, Major League Baseball got a C grade in the latest report. Now, in racial hiring, they're a little better. They actually got an A- this year, but it still trails the NBA, it still trails MLS. So there is work to be done. But having said that, people I've spoken to for this story told me that with Renee's work, you can't judge it based on 1 or 2 years. It's really going to take 5 to 10 years before you see the fruits of her labor manifest in front offices.
All right, David, so we're just wrapping up, but something I want to ask all of the authors, I know how much work and time and conversations go into pieces like this, so what story didn't make it into the piece that you feel like is worth sharing?
Yeah, Renee told me a story about when she was with insurance giant AIG, and she was handling the regions of Central and South America. And with that, it involved meetings down in those regions and in those countries, and she went with her boss, who was male. Now, in the meeting, she would speak to employees, and they would listen to her questions and listen to her comments, and they would look at her boss and respond to her boss, not to her. This happened time and time and time again, and it frustrated Renee to no end. It made her feel marginalized. It made her feel like she had no authority because she was a woman. And it's interesting because it kind of colors a little bit of who Renee is and the passion and the drive she has towards correcting these issues within baseball, because it happened to her.
So David, taking it all in, I Can Find You Brilliance is the title. What is your big takeaway from your big read?
My big takeaway is that diversity is not a given. You need leaders in big businesses like Renee Tirado to kind of push for diversity. You look at the Pride March in New York City as an example, and Major League Baseball's participation in that. In 2017, you would think that being a part of a Pride March is a given for any organization. It wasn't for Major League Baseball. They had never taken part. Renee Tirado, it took her going to the Pride Parade in 2017 and seeing the NBA have a presence there, seeing Commissioner Adam Silver on a float, seeing the NHL have a presence there, and then noticing, hey, Major League Baseball doesn't have a presence here. What are we doing? We need to fix this. She fixed it the next year in 2018. That was MLB's first official participation in the New York City Pride Parade. And now it's a fixture within Major League Baseball's plans for Pride Month. And that's just a prime example of how you need people in these roles like Renee Tirado to push these things forward. Otherwise, they just get forgotten about amid the daily bustle of trying to win a championship.
And my favorite quote, I can't boil an ocean, but I can simmer a river if you give me the tools to try. So Renee, obviously making headway for Major League Baseball. Thank you so much, David. You can check out his big read at sportsnet.ca.